Welcome dear friends to my video lecture on Unit 10 Inclusive Education for NET Education. Let us straight away enter into the topic. Inclusive Education. What is the concept? What are the principles, scope? Who are the target groups? Inclusive education means providing education to all students in the same environment. It aims to ensure that every child learns together regardless of their abilities, backgrounds or needs. It is based on the belief that every child has a right to education. This approach values diversity in the classroom and promotes equal opportunities. What is the concept of inclusive education? Inclusive education is about removing barriers for learning for all students. It focuses on providing equal opportunities to children with different abilities and needs. The goal is to ensure participation and achievement for every child. It respects and celebrates the differences among learners. Inclusive education works towards creating a supportive and flexible learning environment. What are the principles of inclusive education? Equity and equality, that is, every student should have equal access to learning opportunities. Diversity, differences among students are seen as strengths rather than problems. Then participation, all students should actively participate in all school activities. Then flexibility, teaching methods should adapt to the diverse needs of learners. Collaboration, teachers, parents and communities should work together to support all students. Then respect for rights. Education must respect all rights of all children. Social justice. It aims to bridge the gap between privileged and marginalized groups. What is the scope of inclusive education? Inclusive education covers all levels of education from preschool to higher education. It applies to formal, informal and non-formal education systems. Schools need to provide necessary support systems like resource rooms and special educators. It includes adapting the curriculum to meet the needs of diverse learners. It promotes awareness and understanding of diversity among teachers and students. Inclusive education extends beyond academics to ensure emotional and social development. It also focuses on creating accessible physical environments in schools. What are the target groups of inclusive education? First of all, diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with different learning styles, languages, and abilities. This group may have unique strengths and challenges that require personalized approaches. Inclusive education addresses their varied needs and ensures their participation. Then marginalized groups. Marginalized groups include students from economically weaker sections of society. It includes children from socially disadvantaged communities or minority groups. These children often face discrimination and lack access to quality education. Inclusive education aims to bring them into mainstream classrooms. Then, learners with disabilities. This is another group. Students with disabilities include those with physical, intellectual or sensory impairments. They may need special support like assistive devices, modified teaching methods or therapy. Inclusive education integrates them into regular schools to promote acceptance and equality. This approach helps reduce stigma and prepares them for life in the larger community. What is the importance of inclusive education? Inclusive education builds a sense of belonging among students. It improves academic performance by encouraging collaboration and peer support. It helps students develop empathy, respect and social skills. Inclusive education contributes to a more inclusive society. It ensures that no child is left behind in the journey of learning. What are the challenges in implementing inclusive education? First of all, lack of trained teachers. Lack of trained teachers to handle diverse learners. Very difficult to get such trained teachers. Insufficient resources like assistive devices and learning aids. We are not having enough financial support for this. Then inaccessible school buildings and classrooms. According to the needs of such, special children, we need to have school buildings, school classrooms, even toilet facilities, etc. It is not accessible. That's a problem. Resistance from parents or communities due to lack of awareness. Limited financial support for inclusive programs, not enough money spent on this inclusive education. What are the solutions to overcome challenges? We need to provide training to teachers on inclusive teaching methods. Secondly, we must allocate funds for infrastructure and learning aids. We must be able to create awareness programs for parents and communities. Then we should develop policies that mandate inclusive education in schools. We should encourage collaboration among schools, government and non-government organizations, namely NGOs. So, inclusive education is a powerful tool for achieving equity and social justice. It values every child and ensures their right to learn together. By embracing diversity, it creates a strong and more inclusive society. Government, schools, teachers and communities must work together to make this vision a reality. Inclusive education benefits everyone by fostering acceptance, respect and understanding. Let us analyze some of the important questions related to this topic. What does inclusive education primarily aim to provide? Free textbook for all students, education for all students in the same environment, scholarships for marginalized students, special schools for students with disabilities. What does inclusive education primarily aim to provide? That is, B. Education for all students in the same environment. Inclusive education ensures that all students, regardless of the differences, learn together in the same environment. Which of the following is not a principle of inclusive education? Equity, discrimination, flexibility, and participation. Which is not a principle of inclusive education, that is a discrimination. Discrimination goes against the core idea of inclusive education, which promotes the equity and participation for all students. What does inclusive education celebrate? Uniformity among learners, diversity among learners, competition among learners, isolation of learners. That is diversity among learners. And this is what inclusive education celebrates. Diversity, is a springboard for equity and equality in the school system. So, inclusive education values and celebrates the differences and diversity in the classroom. What is the key characteristic of flexible teaching methods in inclusive education? They are rigid and standardized. They adapt to the needs of diverse learners. They focus only on high achievers. They are solely technology driven. So, what is the key characteristic of flexible teaching methods in inclusive education? That is, they adapt to the needs of diverse learners. Flexibility in teaching ensures that the need of all learners, including those with special requirements, are met. What type of learners does inclusive education address? Only students with disabilities, only students from wealthy families, all students regardless of background or ability, only academically gifted students. So what type of learners does inclusive education address? That is, all students regardless of background or ability. Inclusive education is designed to cater to all students, including those from marginalized groups, diverse backgrounds, and learners with disabilities. Which of these is a target group of inclusive education? Working professionals, marginalized groups, only boys in rural areas, adult learners only. So which of these is a target group of inclusive education? That is marginalized groups. Inclusive education focuses on marginalized groups, ensuring their participation and inclusion in mainstream education. Which principle of inclusive education focuses on bridging the gap between privileged and underprivileged groups? That is social justice, not competition, not isolation, not exclusivity, but social justice. This principle of inclusive education focuses on bridging the gap between privileged and underprivileged students. Social justice in inclusive education aims to reduce inequality and provide equal learning opportunities. What is the primary goal of inclusive education? academic excellence only, participation and achievement for all students, exclusion of underperforming students, preparing students for special schools, which is the right one. What is the primary goal of inclusive education? That is participation and achievement for all students. Inclusive education ensures that all students can participate fully and achieve their potential. What does inclusive education ensure for children with disabilities? What does inclusive education ensure for children with disabilities? Placement in separate institutions, opportunities to learn in regular schools, lower educational standards, exemption from learning activities. That is, opportunities to learn in regular schools. Inclusive education integrates children with disabilities into regular schools to promote equality and acceptance. What is the term assistive devices referred to in inclusive education? Assistive devices, tools used for exams, equipment to help learners with disabilities, sports equipment for schools, technology for all students. That is, equipment to help learners with disabilities. Assistive devices are tools like wheelchairs, hearing aids, or screen readers that support learners with disabilities. What does equity mean in inclusive education? Giving equal treatment to all learners, providing individualized support based on needs, ensuring competition among learners, separating high and low achievers. What does equity mean in inclusive education? That is, providing individualized support based on needs. That is equity. Equity ensures that every student gets the support they need to succeed based on their unique requirements, needs. What is a common challenge in implementing inclusive education? Lack of diverse learners, lack of trained teachers, overabundance of resources, resistance from students. What is the common challenge in implementing inclusive education? A major challenge is the shortage of teachers trained in inclusive teaching strategies. It's very difficult, some people believe, say they don't get involved in teaching strategies. So that is the idea here. Which of these is not an example of a marginalized growth? Economically weaker sections, minority communities, children with disabilities, teachers. That is, teachers. Teachers are not considered a marginalized group in the context of inclusive education. Of course, economically weaker section, minority communities, children with disabilities, they are all examples of a marginalized group. What is the key benefit of inclusive education for students with disabilities? What is the key benefit? Improved social skills and empathy, separate classrooms for them, reduced competition, exclusion of other learners. That is, improved social skills and empathy. That is the key benefit of inclusive education for students with disabilities. Inclusive education fosters empathy and social skills among all students. Which organization promotes inclusive education globally? UNESCO, FIFA, WTO, NASA. So which is the right one? Which organization promotes inclusive education globally? That is UNESCO. UNESCO supports inclusive education to ensure equal learning opportunities worldwide. Which principle is violated when students are excluded from participating in school activities? That is a participation principle. All should participate in the school system, irrespective of their physical or psychological deformities or anything. So, which principle is involved here? Participation. Exclusion goes against the principle of participation, which measures involvement of all students. So, participation is very essential. Then, what does social inclusion aim to reduce in education? Academic performance, stigma and discrimination, creativity among learners, collaboration among teachers. What does social inclusion aim to reduce in education? That is a stigma and discrimination. Social inclusion reduces stigma and discrimination, ensuring respect for all students. Why is collaboration important in inclusive education? It helps in isolating marginalized groups. It supports teamwork among educators, parents and communities. It eliminates the need for special educators. It discourages diversity in the classroom, which is the right one. Why is collaboration important in inclusive education? That is, collaboration ensures that all stakeholders work together to support the students in inclusive education. Which of the following is a part of the scope of inclusive education? Non-formal education only, formal, informal and non-formal education, online education exclusively, academic subjects only. Which of the following is a part of the scope of inclusive education? That is formal, informal and non-formal education. That is the scope. Inclusive education covers all forms of education at all levels. How does inclusive education benefit society? By reducing the number of schools, by creating a more inclusive and understanding society, by focusing only on academics, by segregating students based on abilities. So, how does inclusive education benefit society? That is by creating a more inclusive and understanding society. Inclusive education prepares students to accept and value diversity, benefiting society as a whole. What is the focus of curriculum adaptation in inclusive education? Standardization of lessons, meeting the needs of diverse learners, removing practical activities, focusing only on exam preparation. So, what is the focus of curriculum adaptation in inclusive education? That is meeting the needs of diverse learners. Curriculum adaptation ensures that learning materials meet the needs of all learners. Which challenge is faced due to inaccessible school buildings? I hope you understand this question. Which challenge is faced due to inaccessible school buildings? Lack of teaching aids, limited physical participation of students with disabilities, reduced teacher motivation, overcrowded classrooms. Inaccessible buildings can prevent students with physical disabilities from attending schools. What is the role of awareness programs in inclusive education? To isolate diverse learners, to promote understanding and acceptance, to discourage participation, to focus on high achievers. What is the role of awareness programs in inclusive education? That is to promote understanding and acceptance. Awareness programs help communities understand and support inclusive education. What is the significant outcome of inclusive education for students with disabilities? What is the significant outcome of inclusive education for students with disabilities? Lifelong isolation, preparation for inclusion in society, reduced learning opportunities, increased dependence. That is preparation for inclusion in society. Inclusive education prepares students with disabilities for life in an inclusive society. Which policy change can strengthen inclusive education? Reducing teacher training programs, mandating inclusive education in schools, increasing school segregation, limiting funding for inclusive programs. So, which policy change can strengthen inclusive education? That is mandating inclusive education in schools. In other words, compulsorily everyone has to be taken in the normal schools. That is mandating inclusive education in normal schools. Policies that mandate inclusive education encourage schools to embrace and implement it effectively. Thank you very much, dear friends. God bless you abundantly. Let us meet in other video lectures. Kindly subscribe, like it, and comment if you want, so that this video gets more value. I will be giving all the topics in Unit 10 of NET education, inclusive education, slowly one by one. Quickly I want to do it so that the exam has been already announced for you. I am getting ready with the PDF files. If you ask for it, I will be sending it. God bless you abundantly.